Hey folks, welcome to today's video. Today I want to show you guys how I made my fishing net from season 5 of Alone when I was in Mongolia. And I'm not going to use the exact same things that I had there, but I've got some maybe even a little easier stuff to use, so stay tuned. So what I'm looking for is just something obviously that's not dead. It's gonna just break. I want it live, something I could bend. I want it as light as possible, but as strong as possible. And you know, you just have to find a compromise in there. I think this one's gonna work pretty good. It's a little crooked at the top. I'd rather it was perfectly straight, but you know. I can make something like that work. So I'm just going to try and harvest this. Just like that. And seeing how I'm here, I might as well cut these branches off. Let's take this back to the garage where it's a little less buggy and not under the bacon sun. Alright folks, well you saw me harvest that willow. That is a willow by the way. And they just grow in my front yard there. And what I'm going to do now is just like with my fishing pole, I'm going to try and see which way it naturally bends. And I'm next to my house. You're going to hear the wind chimes going off, but this is a comfortable spot for me to work. Figure out which way it naturally bends and try to help it bend that way. So this already has a nice arc to it. I don't want to cut anything off yet in case something happens. I want to get it all kind of finished and then I'll trim it up to the length that I want. So I'm just going to work this over my knee a little bit. Just try to flex this. And see how well it starts to bend on itself without snapping. These branches up here are a little too fragile to just hold on to it, to tie it to its base here. I want to get it to about right here. And I want to make it semi-small. That was the problem I had in Mongolia, is I didn't really want that big of a net, but I kept snapping them, or well, I guess I only snapped one, but you got to be kind of careful how much pressure you put on this thing. I'd like to get it right to this knot here. This is still, I'm not exactly happy with this. I'd like to rotate it, I'd like to bend it a little bit more so that right about here I can lash it to itself and it'll be good and strong. So I need to bend it a little bit more back towards the base. And see why I didn't cut it. Look, I'm already back quite a ways on the handle. Just like that. So now I'm going to get my string ready. I'm going to go ahead and cut some off. This is just a bank line. I don't know what size it is. It's really small. It's a small size. I'll probably cut about this much off. Like I said, in Mongolia I used wire, or maybe I didn't say that, but in Mongolia I used some of my snare wire. I had to judge what resources I had more of. Obviously, I had more snare wire than just about anything else. I'm just going to tie a stop knot in the end of this. Then I'm going to tie a jam knot. I'm going to get this first knot pretty darn tight. You can see with the wire, you got to realize it was about a year ago that we did this show. So I can't remember everything about it, but I do know that the snare wire held on pretty good. I mean, the string works good too, obviously, but the snare wire wouldn't loosen up on me all the time. And I've got plenty of string here, excuse me, so I can add more as needed. So I'm just gonna wrap it around. So I'm not going to need these little fragile branches here. I can cut these off or snap them off, whatever. I want to be careful of this bend right here though, because if I cut across this bend, it's under a lot of pressure right now and it'll just cut right clean through. And it's the same principle as how I used to harvest this actually. You bend a sapling over quite sharply and then cut your knife through it and it'll slice pretty easy. Now I'll go around the other way and do a couple of half hitches, just to make sure that when I cut this tag end off there, it won't come undone. Alright, now there. So now I have my basic framework. This is just, you know, a landing net for me. It's not some really long thing that I'm going to try to do dip netting with or anything. Most of the time, I gotta admit, I'm not really familiar with dip netting. It's certainly not, I'm sure it's not legal in my state. But they use really long nets, really long handles, and it's in like whitewater. It's in very frothy water, which a lot of the trout species like. The water in Mongolia was extremely clear, and I could see the fish, but they could see me as well. And they were out there at least probably 10 feet out into the river. So it would have been hard for me to harvest a willow. I would have had to like lash it together or do something to try and reach way out there and dip net it while it's sitting there watching me. So whatever. All right, let's take this to the garage and I'll show you the beginnings of the net. Okay, so you can see I've got it kind of supported here. I just put it through a little notch there in my garage door and I tie wired it there. And I also took a string and tied it to the top of my garage just for a support. Alright, so I've got it here. I did this same thing in a tree. I supported my net in a tree and I hung it from a couple of strands of monofilament line. That was another resource that I had quite a bit of. I believe they let us take 300 yards. I never lost any fishing line. I used some up, some different lengths in some passive fishing snares. Basically I would put a trigger stick and a trigger mechanism and I would throw bait out into the water, and if a fish bit or whatever, then I was hoping that it would spring. Nothing ever took my bait. That's how I know that folks were wondering how we were fishing and why I was fishing the way I was. I tried fishing a lot of different ways. I tried fishing with weights. I tried using hand lines. I tried in deep eddies. I tried fishing snares like I was saying. I used grasshoppers. I used worms, and I used frogs. The frogs, and the reason I used frogs is because there were fish in that river that I'm familiar with. It's a northern pike. Northern pike are extremely aggressive, and if you watch the show, even those Lennox, Britt caught one and there was a mouse inside of it. Britt had quite a few Lennox, quite a few bigger fish. I had some Lennox, but mostly I had the grayling. And the grayling are, they're a trout species, but the ones I had were extremely small. So there's no way they could have eaten a frog. They didn't even like the big grasshoppers. I had to find the smallest grasshoppers I could find and the smallest hooks I could find. These fish were like this big, like maybe as big as this thing of bank line here. They were really small. And then sometimes, once in a while, I'd catch a nice sized lennox. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but if you watch the show, that one time I was screaming, some folks thought that this was after the fishy dance. Folks thought that I had lost a fish. No, I had actually caught the biggest fish that I've caught in quite some time. It had to be almost 2 feet long. Biggest trout anyway I've caught in a long time. It was a lennox. And but anyway, that was a rarity. Most of the time they were really small grayling. And someone else also commented, why did I make the square so small on my net? Well, because the fish were small. All right, but for this net, I'm going to make it exaggeratedly big because I don't have 10 hours or 12 hours or 4 hours to devote to this net right now. I have to work tomorrow. I want to make this video semi-short. But this will at least get you the idea. The length of string that you start off with just depends on how much it's going to get tangled. Because this isn't like using a net needle where you can coil all the line onto your needle and you don't have it all flopping all over. This is kind of the beginner way or the easy way to make a net because I can never remember how to do the net needle. I'm not into that. So regarding the length of the line, you have to remember that every knot you tie, I've been told anyway, I haven't really measured it, but takes up approximately an inch of your line. So if I have, 12 inches of line, then I can get about 12 knots out of there at the most, probably more like 10 or 11. But anyway, I'm going to make these, maybe I'll make them arm distance. Maybe not even that much. I'm going to make them hit the ground. And that'll be my middle part. And then I'll cut the line right there. So now I just have a loop of line. And I'm going to take it and just tie it onto this net. I'm going to cut some of these all the same length, and I'll get a close-up of what I'm doing here. So this was my first one right here. And I'm just going to figure out about how big I want my squares to be. In Mongolia, I had the lines really close together. Here, I'm going to do them quite a bit further apart so it doesn't take as much time. But I just take the loop end, so a length of string, fold it in half, take the loop end, wrap it around your stick, and bring the tail end through. And then just, you don't have to worry about cinching it up too much. It's whatever, it's right there. So I'm just going to take these and continue to do that around the horn here. This black line's really hard to show up, but anyway, like I said, it's one piece of line, even up the ends. That creates a loop. The loop goes around the stick, and then I bring the tag end back through the loop. I used so much line in Mongolia that I actually had to splice on to the end of these. I used a lot of line, but it made a really nice fine mesh net. Once again, the distance between these strings will dictate how large or how small your squares are going to be. This would be the same thing for making a longer net rather than round. It's the same procedure. It's actually easier if you make a straight net as opposed to a round net. But anyway, I've got 2 strings hanging here from this one piece of cordage. I put a loop in it, tied it around here, around the stick, and I've got 2 ends. I take one of the ends, I'm going to work around this way, okay? So I'll take the end closest to me, or closest to the next string, I guess, and I'll tie a knot. Now, like I said, I'm going to make these really big and silly, but just for demonstration purposes. And I'm just going to take it and turn a loop and bring the end through. It's just basically like an overhand knot type of thing. It's just a straight knot. and then I'll pull it tight. Okay. Now I'll take the next one and figure out where that knot was, which is about down there. And I'll just take it, turn a loop, bring the tag end through, and then I'll see this one's going to be way shorter, so I can just feed it a little bit of line and make it the same size. And I'm just going to continue to work around this until all these knots are tied. Now we've come to our last string here, and you always do an odd number of strings. So I started with this one. This is one string, even though it's got two parts to it. It's one string, one knot up here on top, and I have 13 on here. And then when I come to my last knot, I've got the two ends from two separate strings there, and then it'll all be the same. And some of these got a little out of control, I see. That's part of the thing with doing a net like this, and especially with how exaggerated I've made these. You can see this one's way longer, this one's way longer. So it's best if I definitely didn't tighten them extremely tight, so I can just loosen them up and shove this knot back up here. So it looks to me like I need to go around and do that because I didn't make my spacing very good. So this is my net right now. I've got them lined up okay. It's easier to make a finer mesh net because then the spacing is more evident. But you can see, like this particular string I tied a little tighter than this one. When you make a finer mesh, it doesn't matter as much if this happens, but you definitely want to try to get them as evenly spaced as you can. Now every one of these has a knot in it. Now all I do, and I can start anywhere now. On a round net you can start anywhere. On a straight net you always tie from one end and then go back to the other end. But now I can take any one of these and tie it to its neighbor. So I'll take this and go over to here. Let's see if I can do this with the camera. So I'm just going to go over to its neighbor here. And tie a knot. Just like that. And you can see it's making your diamond pattern. Now I've got this tag end, and I'll mate it with its neighbor. Just make a loop and bring the ends through. So after I got my net approximately the length that I wanted it, or close to it, see it's, I don't know, it's 1.5 feet deep or long probably. These two strings where I would normally take one of them and tie it to its neighbor to make another square. What I would do instead is I would take the two coming off of this knot and treat it as one and tie it to its neighbor. But only a lot higher up than I was doing before, almost to the knots that I had just made on the previous round. And tie them up really high. And then it still keeps your square. It kind of makes this one a little small, but this is how I did it, and it worked out for me. So then at the end here, I'm left with one odd man out, and I would just tie two of these strings to its neighbor. And then I could start taking two and tie to two right here and make it a little bit longer. So you can see these knots are all bunching up right here, but then I was able to take two and two and make my knot come down a little bit longer. What I'm trying to do is take my net, and instead of just having a bowl effect, I want it to taper down a little bit to the end. And my net was so big in Mongolia that if I were to take these and just tie them in a knot, which would be the easy thing to do with this particular net, so if I were to just take these and tie them in a knot, that's great. But in Mongolia, I had a bunch of strings that were about that big, so it didn't really work out for me. So I just started tying knots and slowly combining the strings into multiple strings, which then I could make a knot out of. It was pretty exciting when I started finally finishing it off, because then you can see the end is in sight. And once you've been doing this for a while, I like it and it's fun and everything, but I was ready for it to be done, and I was ready to go use it and try it out. Tie it onto this one, half and half. It's not like rocket science or anything, or any particular, if you don't do it absolutely this way, your fish is going to get away. So long as the squares are fine, you're fine. See, that one of those is really short, but it'll still work. It didn't make the complete knot, but that's alright. Try to find that one that's making that big loop right there. Then what I did, after I got all this done, you can imagine there's quite a few knots down here. I just took some paracord and wove it. I mean, this net was huge. I'll show it to you here in a minute. But I just wove the paracord in and out and in and out, and then just tied a jam knot, and it sucked it up tight like this. Now I can just take these, which I could have done to begin with, like I explained, and just tie it into a knot. There. Alright folks, well here's the net that I just made, purely for demonstration purposes only. It's not exactly pretty, the squares are way too big, but whatever. You got the concept down, and this would be, I actually am left-handed, so I would put that on the inside, which is fine, and I can scoop my fish up just like this. It's ugly, but you get the idea. This is the one I made in Mongolia. The handle's quite a bit shorter, but it was just because I had to cut it down to get it in my suitcase. It was, I'm sure the handle was at least this long. But you can see here, I used tie wire to tie it, and you can see how small the mesh is. I didn't want to go through all this labor and have the mesh be too big. One or two of them got a little away from me, but then you can see, like down here, where are you at? Down here I had to start splicing lines on. And I did a fisherman knot for the splices. And then I also started combining the strands like I was saying, so you can see there's a couple of big knots. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Either way, take my word for it. I did it just like what I showed you. So yeah, this served me pretty well, and it took me quite a while. You can imagine tying this many small little tiny knots. Definitely took a while, and got a little bunched up here from being in my suitcase, but anyway, it's a good wall hanger, and it works. Alright guys, hope you liked the video. If you have any questions or anything, you know, I realize that tying black line on camera sucks. I understand that. I didn't want to strip a bunch of paracord things out when I have a whole nice thing of bank line. Hopefully you're able to see it. I'll take a look at it when I edit it and make sure you guys can see it. I tried to show you the best I could. Alright, hope you liked the video. Take care.